Hey guys, it's Steve here from CG Geek, and I have something really exciting for you guys today. That is how to create beach waves in Blender, completely Blender. Now, if you're like me, you probably thought that maybe this wasn't even possible in Blender without some third add-on extensions or something, because it just seems so tricky to achieve those splashes, those particles, that foam. It didn't seem like it's possible until I saw this video posted on YouTube by Lucas Weber. He made an amazing simulation in Blender, completely in Blender, of a beach wave scene here where the waves are crashing along the shoreline and you have those particles and you have those splash and the foam, and it all looked really freaking cool. So I'm like, how do you do that? So I contacted Lucas and he gave me permission to show you guys how to do this and actually help me along the way. So really helpful. Thanks a lot to Lucas, and check him out on YouTube at Untitled Blender. He's got some really cool stuff there. There's a link to his channel in the description. But yes, we're going to be creating some beach waves today, and it's going to be using some fluid simulations, some particles, some dynamic paint, all kinds of really cool things. You'll be learning a lot. I learned a lot doing this, so I hope you enjoy. So real quick before we get into the tutorial, if you're interested in downloading the finished file you see here with everything included, you can do that over on my Patreon page for just $3 a month. Along with any other video you've seen on the channel, the finished blend file will be there on the Patreon page where you can support me and also get access to these files. So if you're interested in that, check it out. But now, let's get cracking. Okay, so there's a lot to cover in this tutorial, or tutorials. I guess there might be 2 or 3 parts depending on how long it takes. But let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it. Just make sure you're using the latest version of Blender. That's 2.79 at the time. And we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the cube here by hitting X and delete, and then Shift A and adding in a plane. I'm going to go ahead and scale this plane to be about the size of the grid floor here. So I'm just going to go S and 8. And then I'm going to scale it a little bit more along the Y-axis to give ourselves a little bit of extra geometry on both sides of the grid floor. Alright, now I'm going to lift it up off the floor about a Blender unit or so, which is, as you can see in the grid there. So I'm just going to hold Control and pop it up once by lifting it upwards. And then I'm going to tab into Edit Mode and go Control R and give ourselves some geometry to work with. I'm going to give it about 15 cuts by using the scroll wheel. You can use page up and page down if you don't have a scroll wheel, but you should have a scroll wheel. And I'm going to go ahead and add about 10 cuts going the other direction. Okay, with that done, I'm going to go ahead and enable proportional editing, and I'm going to change the fall off to be sharp to get a better sort of curve to our shoreline here. And then I'm going to go Alt and select that last line of vertices there. And in side view, I'm going to pull it downwards and increase my fall off by using the mouse wheel right to about there. So we have a nice sort of angled thing with it kind of meeting in the center there. And then I'm going to pull it up again, but decrease my proportional editing to be about half of what it was. And I'll pull it up to about there, so it's about 2 Blender units down, as you can see there. And we have a nice sort of beach curvature going there. That will work nicely, and we can go ahead and enable smooth shading on it. Alright, so this is going to be our base, basically our collision for the sand. And now we kind of need to create some fluid. But first off, well, actually, forget, there's no first off. Let's just jump in and create the fluid object. So for this, it is going to be, I'm going to grab just about this vertice here by Alt right-clicking that row of vertices, and we want to travel up to about, let's say this vertice here. So we'll do that, and then select all of the faces. I was saying vertices, I guess they're faces, so my bad. And in side view, we will duplicate these by going Shift D and duplicating them. Then I'm going to hit P and separate by selection. I'm going to grab my smaller selection here now, tab into Edit Mode, select all the faces, and extrude them upwards. Now you want to disable proportional editing by hitting O, and I'm going to pull it upwards. Then I'm going to scale them along the Z to 0 to kind of level off that water, and then I'm just going to lift it up until this point here is about at a point. So I'm going to grab it along the Z-axis just to drop it all the way down to about there. And there will be our fluid object. So that will work nicely. And we don't need it to be quite as wide as everything else, but it doesn't really matter because we're just going to be baking it on the inside, so you can go ahead and leave it at that scale. That will be perfectly fine. So let's do that, and then let's kind of set up our, well, let's set up the domain object for our fluid. So inside view here, I'm going to go Shift A, adding a cube this time, as a domain always needs to be a cube for your fluid. And I'll scale it along the Shift Z up just about, well, like I said, this doesn't have to go to the edge, as our simulation is just going to be taking place inside here. So if I hit Z, you can kind of see I'm a few blender units from the edge here, and that's about right for what I want. Now I'm going to go ahead and scale it along the X or Y axes, making sure I have enough room in front for some splashes here. So scale it along the Y just a little bit more maybe, making sure you have enough room for those waves to kind of run up on the beach there a bit as we create some waves. So that looks about right. And then you want to make sure that there's enough room on top for some waves to come across. So now I'm going to grab that top face and I'm just going to lift it upwards to about there. Something big enough that you can have some waves without it touching the top, messing up your simulation. I'll give it just a little bit more room on bottom as well. And that should be a good amount of room for our fluid simulation. Alright, so now we need to start doing some things to create waves. So this works as a collision, and this will be our fluid, but we need something to mess up the fluid and create some waves. Okay, so we need to create a splash obstacle, and this is just going to be a simple cube that I'm going to place in the back here. So I'm going to go to side view again, place my cursor down on the back there, and go Shift A and add in a cube. Let's go ahead and pull this cube towards the center and scale it along the x-axis. We want it to be bigger than our fluid simulation on both sides. Something like that looks about right. And we can scale it along the y-axis a little bit. Alright, and we'll add a few cuts in here. Something that's important to note that collision objects with fluid, the simpler the geometry, the fewer vertices, the faster the simulation is going to be by a long shot. So actually, I'm just going to leave it as a cube, and I'll just bevel this face here by going Control B, pulling it back, and beveling it a few times by scrolling my mouse wheel. Doesn't have to be anything too big, and our simulation time will go a lot faster if it's smaller. Okay, so something like that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to put a few cuts in the top here, just so I can kind of tweak. If I go to the vertices here, grab this, so we can give it a little bit of a bend. So we have a little bit more interest in our wave form. So I'm going to turn it a little bit like that to give it sort of a bend. Then I'm going to select everything and kind of rotate it over here. So we can kind of come at it on an angle and give it some variation. So it looks like the wind isn't coming straight at the shoreline, but it's a little bit off. All right, I'll pull it back just a little bit now. We don't have to bend it too much. And that's looking pretty good. Maybe pull it in a little bit more and scale it along the y-axis a little bit more. And I might have rotated it just a little too much. You don't want the end to be popping out here too much. But that looks to be about right. If you hit Z, you can see through it. And we can also go ahead and change a lot of these objects, like our fluid, in our viewport here. Let's make a little bit more room to just be a wire axis. So they're not, if we draw it as a wire, then it won't be in our way. And we'll just do that for the fluid here as well, so we can see through it. All right, cool. So now with our splash obstacle here, let's set up a little bit of an animation so it will create some nice splashes. So first off, maybe I'll rotate it upwards just a little bit, but that should be pretty nice. Okay, and let me just kind of check. Our fluid level is right there. So our splash object might be a little big. Scale it down a little bit maybe. Alright. Just sort of positioning it in there like so. That looks to be good, I think. This might take just a little bit of tweaking. You might have to do your simulation a few times until you get the right amount of splash, but hopefully my settings will work for you right off the bat. or I should say Lucas's settings, because most of those I copied directly from him. So now we're going to add in a few keyframes. And it's just going to be location keyframes going up and down to create our wave pattern. So at frame 1, I'm just going to go ahead and hit I and insert a location keyframe. Then I'll go ahead and split my window by dragging this up here and going to our graph editor. Here I'm going to drop down the location here. I'm going to turn off the view on both the X and Y and just select the Z axes here. And we're going to go ahead and jump ahead, 30 frames or so. About so is right. And we're going to insert another location keyframe. And you can see, if I zoom out a little bit, we have our two handles here. And this handle I'm going to raise up along the Y a bit. You can see it over here. We don't want to raise it too much. If it comes out of the water, it really creates some splashes that we don't need. But just raise it up a bit so it comes close to the top of the water, but not all the way. And then I'm going to move ahead about 20 frames this time, as we're going about 30-20, 30-20 with our animation to get kind of that nice sort of wave pattern. I'm going to insert another location keyframe, and then I'll grab that handle and drop it down by going G and Y. So we'll drop this down, pretty low, something like that. We'll scrub again about 30 frames in our timeline here, and we'll add another location keyframe. Grab along the Y-axis, make sure you just select that one, pull it up, scrub again about 20 frames, right to about frame 100, insert a location keyframe, and grab it along the Y-axis again. So just kind of creating this wave pattern. You can pretty much see it right in your graph editor, what the animation pattern is going to look like. And I'll just do this one more time. So we'll go ahead and scrub to frame 130-ish. It doesn't have to be exact. In fact, slightly off could give it a little bit more of a realistic look. So I'm going to go ahead and insert that location keyframe, grab this along the Y, make sure you're down here when you're doing it, pull it up a bit, and then one more. Actually, we don't have to do, well, we should. Okay, so we'll go right around 150 and pull it down. Location, grab it, and grab it along the Y. Excellent. Now what we're going to do is we're going to have it repeat the pattern over and over again, and we'll do this with a modifier. So I'm just going to go N, click the modifiers tab there, add a modifier cycles. And you can see that this is off a little bit here. That just means that we need to grab our handle here and kind of match it up so it lines up there. So I'm just going to grab it along the Y-axis until it lines up perfectly right there. And it looks like I have to come down just a little bit more along the Y-axis. And we have a nice animation there. So you can see now with the cycle modifier, it just keeps going on and on and on. And if we play this through, we have our waves being generated here by our wave generator object. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and make it last for about 400 frames in our timeline here. 400 seems to be about the good number because it's going to take about 250 frames or so to get the waves generated nicely across our whole fluid mesh. So that should work out okay though. Now I'm going to grab our fluid water here, and I'm going to give it a type, fluid. So just give it a fluid simulation. We're starting to add some simulation, so it's getting exciting, and make it fluid. All right. And then here I'm going to give our wave object a fluid obstacle. And we're going to go ahead and choose no slip, and we're going to give it an impact of 1.4, as that just works a little better. And then the volume initialization is going to be shell. All right. And with that set up, we should be pretty good. Actually, this is supposed to be free slip, not no slip, free slip. Okay, so we can go ahead and close off our bottom window there, whoops, to make a little bit more room here. And let's add the collision object to our beach floor here. I'm just going to grab that, go fluid, and we'll choose obstacle again. This time we want to leave it at partial slip though, and I'm just going to give this about a 0.75, as that seems to be the number that works pretty well to have some water kind of sticking, but most of it not sticking on the shore because you don't really want too much. And now we can, well, let's first add in a few rock obstacles. Now I'm not going to show you guys how to create rocks because I've done that in a previous tutorial that you can check out right now in the card up here. I think my voice just squeaked up here. Also, you could buy the nature asset pack that comes with 3 different rock models, and that's what I'm going to use for just $10 if you wanted to support me and the channel. Either way, you can get some rocks though real easy, and you can use them for some obstacles to give it some more interest in your simulation. So I'm going to go ahead and place my cursor right around there, and I'm going to append these rocks from my other file. Like I said, you can pick them up on the Blender Market for $10, or you can make them yourself with the tutorial linked. Alright, awesome though. I'm going to go ahead and quick grab this from here. It's just going to be the object, and it's going to be rocks 1 through 3. Grab all 3 of those and append them. Okay, so they're already actually in the same sort of location that I used them in my other scene. I'm just going to move them around a little bit. So I have a few rocks in the deeper water here that don't really create any sort of splash, so you don't have to add any sort of simulation or anything to them. But then you put some rocks along the shoreline here, and you can get some really interesting sort of splashes as it comes around them. So you can see that the wave level is going to be right here, and that these rocks should be moved up a bit if we want them to be visible and have some waves crashing around them. I'm going to lift them up right around here so it's still in the sand a bit here, but poking out above the water. And maybe give it some rotation to make it interesting. But just some more obstacles to create some cool splashes. So rotate a little bit, drop it down a little bit more, and cool. Now this already has some things applied to it. I'm just going to go ahead and remove it and remove that so you don't have to worry about that. And we'll go ahead and add in the fluid obstacle. So click fluid, obstacle, and this is just free slip, just like the obstacle back here. Same with this. Let me delete what was already there and add in the fluid and obstacle. Free slip. Okay, cool. So with that, we should have our obstacles set up. I believe we should be able to work on our fluid settings and start fine-tuning them until we have a nice sort of simulation going. So, grabbing our fluid domain object here, I really should be naming these. You could do that if you want. We'll just name it fluid cube. And whoops, caps lock was on. Oh well. But yeah, you should be a little bit more organized in naming them if you don't want to get kind of messed up. I'm just kind of moving quick and not doing too much of that. Fluid though, we're going to choose fluid and we're going to choose domain. So with this, we can really set up how our fluid behaves. I'll give ourselves a little bit more room here. And first off is going to be the time. So the time is in frames of how long you want the simulation to last. And so it's going to depend on how long your timeline is. Because we set our timeline to be 400 frames, and we're going to be rendering this at about 24 frames a second, it comes out to about 12 or 13 frames. So I'm going to go ahead and just set it to 13. And that's how long the simulation is going to take between frame 0 and frame 400. Alright, we want to make sure that generate speed vectors is on, and we want to choose a place for our cache fluid. So go ahead and pick a spot on your desktop where you want your cache to be. This is going to be a pretty large file, usually a few gigabytes, so make sure you can fit it on your hard drive. And let's move on to the fluid world settings. The real world size. This is important because this is how big the simulation is in scale. So depending on how big the splashes should be and such, this is going to make a difference. So I decided, and so did Lucas, that 4 meters is a pretty good size for this simulation, which comes out to about 4 meters would be about 16 feet. So go ahead and choose 4 meters. No, 4 meters would be about 12. So yeah, about 12 feet. And that will work well. So we can leave the fluid presets as it is. And let's go down to the fluid boundary. We're just going to leave that at free slip and remove air bubbles. Actually, maybe we don't want to remove air bubbles. Let me quick check. I'm pretty sure that the air bubbles caused an issue if you had that. Yes, don't check that. Leave that unchecked. And don't do any smoothing. This is going to be done with a modifier later to give ourselves better results that we can control later. The smoothing isn't very smart to do it here because you can't change it later, and it will sometimes take away too much fluid. So leave that at 0. And then fluid particles. This is going to control our fluid particles, basically, later on, and how much we have for like the foam that you see. Now this is something that can actually be pretty high. I actually went a little higher than Lucas did in his scene, and I still could have used more particles. So I'm going to go with a pretty high number here, and I'm going to go for 3.5. So 3.5, you can kind of experiment with this number too if you want more or less foam in your scene. But pretty much the more the better, I think. So I'm going to go 3.5. And that should do it for our main settings. Then it's just the resolution. Now, for your final scene, you're going to want to crank this all the way up to something as high as you can. Pretty much like 700, I think is what I went to. And that took about 7 or 16 hours to bake. So it went overnight and a little more than that. But it was worth it for the final quality. But for these tests, until we're getting our fluid really set up nicely, I'm just going to set it to something really low, like 120, just to kind of make sure we're getting the right waves coming across here. And if we are, then we can go ahead and crank it up higher and bake a final bake. But for now, I'm just going to set it to something low, bake it, so we can kind of see how our fluid's going. So if you notice there, I quick save my project before baking, just always a smart habit. And if we start scrubbing through here, we can kind of see how the fluid is going to behave. And it's falling through our obstacle. Okay, so the reason that the fluid is falling through our floor object here, our beach shore, is because we have it set to the volume, which means that we need to have some volume to our collision object. So I'm gonna do what I did with the fluid here, and I'm just gonna tab into edit mode. And as you can see, I turned on the face thing here in the toolbar here. You can turn on the normals to see which direction I'm pointing, which will be helpful here because I want to extrude it along the Z downwards. You have to also turn off proportional editing. So grab it along the Z and pull it down after extruding it. Grab along the Z, pull it down. And I'm going to scale it along the Z to 0. But you can see that this messes up our normals. So to fix that, I'm just going to select everything and recalculate. Now the normals are all pointing out the way they should be. And we can turn that off. And you can see that we have a physical object here now. So if I close that off and go ahead and start baking our simulation again here, we will see as it starts working its way through here that it's not falling through our object, but it's staying on that shoreline. Cool. So you can see this is a very low quality. And if I turn the preview to final, we'll see a little better quality here, but still very low quality. And I'm going to change this to texture now so we can see a little bit better of what it's looking like. But this is just to kind of get an idea of how our waves are going to look. And it's a little hard to tell. Okay, so we're getting a few more ripples in our simulation than I would like. It's kind of splashing around a lot. And there's a few things that I haven't done yet to kind of fix that. And that is, one of them is grabbing our object here and changing it to wire. So because we have it set up to be a shell object in the fluid collisions here, this can be wire, and then our simulation can simulate inside of it, and it just disrupts the water a little less, and it pretty much just uses the faces then to move the fluid. So to go ahead and do that, and it will help. And then what I have to do is just kind of smooth this object out a little bit. So I'm going to tab to edit mode, grab it, hit W, and smooth, just to give ourselves a little bit more of a smooth, round object there that might not be as much, you know, force, you could say, on the fluid sim. And then let's give it a little bit more variation along the shoreline here. It's perfectly straight. What we can do to make that look a little nicer is if I grab my collision floor here, take some of these vertices here, enable proportional editing, let's change it to connected, and then kind of just pull some of these upwards a bit, like so. We can kind of give the shoreline, maybe if I make this smooth for this one, we can kind of make the shoreline a little bit more bowed, which is going to give a little bit more differential in the way of things a little bit, as it might drop down a little bit more there. And then I can also do just that, make it drop down a little bit there, like so. Now, let me grab the fluid object here. This will automatically kind of fill in that gap, so you don't really have to change this much. So we'll just leave the fluid object as it is, but maybe make it a little bit deeper. So to do that, I'm just going to grab all the faces on top. So I'm going to go to side view and box select just the top faces there. Everything across the top, not the bottom. So select just the top there. Alright, we have to change this so we can see the faces through. And then go ahead and do just the top there. Boom. Perfect. And I'm just going to pull it up a little bit. Of course, turn off proportional editing. pull it up a little bit to make the water a little bit deeper. And then on the end here, I want to select just those faces and pull them out a little further so it reaches to the shoreline a little better. Deselect these faces, and I'm just going to pull those shoreline faces a little further to the edge of the water here. All right, pull them out. It looks good, and that should work just fine. So with that set up, we should have a little better simulation. Another thing you can do is, if I split my window again and grab the graph editor, you could take your curves, and if you think the waves might be a little too harsh, you just scale it all along the y-axis a little bit to kind of level them out. So not too much, but you can take a little bit of it out just so it's not quite as crazy. Okay, and as this bakes, you can see that we have a very nice sort of wave simulation coming along here now, much better than it was before. Just some nice gently flowing waves, and we can increase the height now a little bit more if we wanted, just to make it a little bit more intense now. And possibly pull everything down a little bit. If you feel like it's coming up too much and causing splashes, then you can grab everything along the y-axis and move it down. But I feel like that's going to be pretty good now that the water's a little bit deeper. And we can also see that the shoreline here is looking a little bit better. It's a little bit leveling out here. Is it hitting the edge of the domain? You might have to check that. If it is, we might have to pull a little bit of our fluid away. Yes, it is. So we have a little bit too much fluid now coming out for our domain. So let's just pull it back a little bit. And we can always make our domain object a little bit bigger as well. So whatever you want to do, I'm going to first just pull these faces back a little bit. So we have a little less fluid. And then I will make the domain a bit bigger, which also means you might want to grab your shoreline. Let's grab just that edge on the end here of vertices, or faces, I should say. Go top view. Select them all by hitting C on our keyboard. And we can go ahead and extrude this out a little further for a little bit more shoreline. Alright. I'll pull out just a little bit further, grab that top ring of vertices and give it a little bit more angle here as well. Oops, it looks like I have some duplicates here. Just select them all, and in our toolbar, tools, remove doubles right there. And then, yeah, with that top face of vertices there, not all of you, just the top ones, we'll lift it up a little bit higher to give ourselves a little bit more beach shore. And that's looking very nice and should work. It does look like I have a few more doubles, so just select everything and remove the doubles. And that should work. So if I bake my simulation now, I think we'll be getting some pretty nice results, and I think we might be ready to bake a higher resolution. These are just little things that you want to check though before you go ahead and bake a crazy high resolution, because if you notice that later after you let it go all night long or something, you'd probably be a little bit upset with yourself. Alright, so you can see that we're getting a little bit too intense of waves here now, as it's splashing a little higher than I'd like. So I'm going to scale this down a little bit more, as I feel like I went too far there. If you guys are having trouble realizing how much you want, go into the object settings here, and you can see that at the lowest point I'm at about minus 0.1, and at the highest point I'm at about 0.4. So you're really only moving about 0.5 at the most. I can make that a little less actually. So not too much variation. It goes from about 0.4 to 0.9. So maybe even a little bit less. Just so if you guys want to know what the numbers are exactly, as you can see that gets a little crazy with the splashing. Alright, I think I also might want to give my domain just a little bit more room on top. That might be why the bigger waves aren't working too well once you get splashing. Okay, but with that set and done, we can test it one more time. Alright, and that's looking pretty good. If we kind of flow through our animation here, you can see it's taking about 250 or so frames for the waves to really hit the surface though, which is a little slow in my opinion. So I'm not going to change the amount of animation anymore, but I'm going to make this a little bit bigger by scaling along the y-axis here. Pulling it out, maybe scaling it along the z just a little bit to hopefully create just a little bigger waves that will reach the edge a little sooner, so we have a little bit more simulation time, and maybe rotate it along the z just a little bit to give a little bit more of an angle to these waves. If you look top down, you can see we have some angle, but a little bit more might be nice. So the simulation is getting a little longer than I wanted. Longer not in length, but in length of the size, not length of tutorial. All right, now that that's out of the way, I'm just going to scale the water and the fluid and the object here back a little bit. So I'm going to scale it along the Y just to shrink it in a little tighter so we don't have quite the length going that we did. I have to pull it all back a little bit then, of course, and I have to move my obstacles here. The rocks back there I can move whenever because they're not collisions, but these I want to get in place pretty good right now. So right about so. And now I'm going to do another test real quick here. I was going to do my final render there, but I want to quick change it back to a test so I can kind of see that the simulation is still going to look good before we do our crazy bake. Okay guys, so I like the look of this simulation after I scaled it down a little bit in length, so we get a little bit more waves happening a little quicker here. You can see the waves are kind of hitting more, if I change this to final, it'd be a little higher quality, hitting more around 200 frames, and that's better in my opinion, because we can get on with the simulation faster and have more information to work with. The one thing is, I do think I want to raise up these vertices a little bit, just to make the shore a little higher at this point, so the waves don't sit up quite so high. I feel like they probably get a little higher than I'd like, and the tide needs to go down. So I'm just going to select these vertices here and lift it up a little bit. This is where you can kind of experiment with the type of simulation you're going, and this is exactly where you want to be tweaking it, not after you've done an overnight a bake, but just after a quick test bake. You want to test it to make sure that you're getting the results you desire. But I think that will look pretty good, and I might pull that in just a little bit so it matches the curve there a little better. But that should do it. A little higher, and let me turn proportional editing on there. A little bit higher on our shoreline, just so we should be connected, just so we don't have those waves pouring up quite so high. Okay, now one important thing to mention before we do our bake is that we have to also bake our particle fluid settings. Now I wasn't talking about this earlier, and I kind of forgot actually that we had to do this before we baked our fluid, but it's important to do this first before we do our final bake. So first off, I want to move our fluid object, which is this here. You can see I started my high quality bake, but I'm not gonna use it. I'm gonna rebake it. But you can start with this and your objects. Actually, seeing my high quality bake here, I might want to pull this rock down a little bit. You're never done tweaking, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. But now I'm gonna grab just our fluid, our domain fluid, not our fluid obstacle, and our objects here. I can just box select it. We can go ahead and select that too. I guess it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to move it holding shift to the bottom layer, because on this layer we're going to have our particles render, and it just keeps it kind of simpler to have it on both layers like that. So now I need just a random object to work as our fluid emulator, basically. So I'm just going to add in a plane here, and we'll call it our plane.fluid. And this is going to be what we put our fluid and our particle fluid on. So this is going to control basically the fluid particles, and it's going to be drops and floats. We can leave the size and alpha at 0 because we're not going to be actually rendering this. It's just going to create the particle setting here that you can see. And we go ahead and click that. And we don't want it, like I said, to render. We just want it to be there for our particles to instance later on. So I'm going to change it to none as far as render goes. And display, we can just leave it at a point. And that point will be just a 2 size drop pixel. So we're just going to see this in the viewport, and it won't be rendered. When it comes to rendering, we're going to use a particle instance modifier to add the particles to it. It's just the better way to do it. Gives you a little bit more control. So with that said and done, we should be ready to bake, I think. I know I've said that a few times, but I'm going to go ahead and turn on both layers there by holding shift and clicking both of them. And one thing to note before we go further, I can go ahead and do this now, is we will be adding a smooth modifier. So I'll do that right now just so you guys can see what it will look like. So it's going to be modifier smooth. And this is instead of doing the smoothing in the bake fluid settings, because this being later gives you a lot more control and also will not ruin the fluid like sometimes the other one will. So we'll give this a factor of 1, and then we're going to repeat it about 6 to 8 times. And you can see that just really smooths out our fluid, makes it look quite a bit nicer in my opinion. Alright, with that said and done though, I think we are ready to bake. Famous last words, I know. But I think we are this time. So we should have our particles baked this time as well, as we have our particles set up here. And you can see that it will be baking a lot of particles. So let's go ahead and bake now. This time, for sure. And I think I'm going to have to reduce the quality for myself down to about 400, just so it's done in a slightly more timely manner. But as I've said before, you guys can bake as high quality as you want. Maybe let it go overnight. And we'll see what we get. Okay, so our fluid simulation after about 2 hours is finished now, and you can see that we have a nice high quality fluid. I mean, it could be even more high quality, but this isn't bad for, I think it was 400 resolution. And our smooth modifier doing its thing. Maybe a little too strong, because we can also turn on the smoothing here. So if I turn that on, you can see that maybe it's taken on a little bit too much. Maybe we can go down to about a 0.5 and get just a little bit more detail. And maybe repeat it just 4 times. You can play around with the setting. Depending on your fluid, you may want more or less smoothing. I might leave it at a little less, maybe just a 0.5. And if I turn it on, well, because I wasn't seeing the changes, there we go, 0.4. Yeah, just a little less. And it's looking pretty good. So now let's go ahead and work on the particles. So we're going to use a particle instance to take all these little dots that are just floating in 3D space right now and make them an actual object. We're going to use a icosphere. Okay, so you're going to want to go Shift S and choose Cursor to Center. It's important that your cursor is in the center of your scene here. And then you're going to go Shift A and add in an icosphere. Make sure the subdivisions are turned to 1 because we want the lowest quality possible. And then we're going to scale this way down. So I'm going to scale it to a 0.03. Alright, and then go Control A and we're going to apply that scale. And now we can apply our particle instance modifier to this icosphere to make it be the particles seen in the scene here. So I'm going to choose particle instance modifier on our icosphere, and then choose the object plane.fluid. Now this is going to take a little bit of time because there's so many particles in this scene that it is replacing as icospheres. So you have to wait, depending on your system, a little bit. But there you go. You can see that all the particles are now icospheres, and those will be creating our foam effect. So you can also choose size here, and this will give you a nice kind of random looking particle, as it will change the scale depending on where it's located and stuff. So go ahead and choose that. I found it gave a nice effect, and it'll make it much smaller as well, which is okay. And that is looking pretty good. Just kind of checking the scale around. And about, we might have to change the scale a little bit, but I think it's looking very decent. So we can go ahead and turn off the visibility of this, just so it doesn't slow down our viewport. But there is our particles. Alright, so what's left to do is, for this part, I think we'll finish the simulations. So let's do the dynamic paint. So for the dynamic paint, I want a separate object to paint on. And so I'm going to take the surface of our floor here, our ocean floor you can call it. And I'm going to grab all the top vertices all the way down, just like so. Make sure they're all selected. Hit Shift D, and then hit P and separate by selection. So we have to tab out of edit mode and grab our new object, which is, if I just click here, I can go to here and hide those particles, so it goes a little faster too. You can see right there we have our top plane. And this is for our dynamic paint and texture. So I'm going to lift this up just a tad, and I also want to change this to textured, so I can see how it looks like through the water. And lifting it up just a tad will make sure that it's contacting the fluid right, and it'll also kind of hide a little bit of the rigid bottom that you see to the ocean there. So in our renders, it'll look just a little bit better. So grab along the Z-axis and lift it upwards, holding Shift to really cut back how far you go. And you can see that's just a little bit there, but I think that's going to be pretty good. Maybe just a tad more, holding Shift and lifting it upwards, like so. And that should give us a pretty good result. I think that looks decent. All right. So this is going to be our dynamic paint surface, and the ocean here is going to be our paint. So grab the ocean and go to your physics settings here. We can collapse our fluid for now because we don't need to worry about those settings, and choose dynamic paint. This is going to be the brush, so choose add brush, and it's going to be painting a white material. So grab the color and make it completely white. It's going to be painting from the mesh volume, that's fine, and then we'll choose dynamic paint. Waves, velocity, that can all stay the same. Pretty much that's all we have to change. Just make this white by going 100% on all the values here. And that will work. So then let's go to our canvas here. And I'm going to choose dynamic paint. This is going to be the canvas, so choose add canvas. We want to be an image sequence, so choose image sequence. And the frames, we can really start from 150 because we only need about 100 frames before our simulation starts to paint a little bit of the wetness on our sand. I don't know if I explained that yet, but the dynamic paint is for the wetness, just so you know. It's to add the wet effect to the sand to give it more of a water look. Then we're going to disable dry, but we'll choose dissolve and just turn it down to a smaller value, like 30 or so. And uncheck slow, we don't need to worry about that. This doesn't really matter because we're going to be taking our paint and blurring it and expanding it that way anyways. So the dynamic paint output, we're going to want to choose a location. I'm just going to create a new folder in our file folder here, and I'm going to call it paint. Go ahead and put the images in that folder, and PNGs are fine. No other effects really needed. So we can leave it just at that. We do have to unwrap our plane, and I do think I could lift it up just a little bit more. Cut back a little bit of the fluid on the beach here, because it's a little bit more fluid than we need here anyways. Alright, so with that done, we can grab our plane here, and I'm going to go tab, select it all, U, and unwrap. Now if I quick open a window here, we can see, I'll do it down here, our UV image editor that we have a nice unwrap. That's all we need. So we can collapse that down now. And when we bake our image sequence here, it will be baking all of our images to that folder, starting at frame 150. Let's change the resolution to be about 512, so a little higher quality. Save our file. And one last thing we need to change before we start baking is our initial color. We want it to be black, so we're going to choose dynamic paint initial color, change it to color, and then change it to be completely black. So this is going to be painting basically white over black. And of course I missed one last thing, and that is we can take our rocks and also make these paint the surface, just to make sure that the area around them is wet. Otherwise it's kind of blocking the water from touching it. So what we can do for that is just another dynamic paint. This is a brush, of course. And instead of mesh volume, we're going to do mesh volume plus proximity. Now the proximity can be smaller than 1, just like about 0.5 or so. And that's all we have to do. Of course, make it white just like before. So it's painting white like everything else. And we should be good to go. Same thing with this rock, I think. We can go ahead and add the dynamic paint. Brush. Add the brush in. Make the color white. And proximity plus the mesh, and then a 0.5. And this will just give kind of a dynamic wet paint around the surface or base of the rock. So that's good. I may have pulled this up a little bit, looking at the simulation around 250. It's cutting off a little bit too much of the water here, so I need to grab it along the Z-axis and hold shift down again, pull it down just a tad there. And that looks to be okay now. Alright, so that will be our painting, and we should be good to go. So now, you can actually leave slow. That doesn't make a difference, so go ahead and leave slow. But now we can go ahead and bake it to our desktop. So, down here, bake image sequence. Okay, and that simulation finished, and my face is back, so that means it's probably getting close to the end of the tutorial. Let me quick show you guys what these finished images look like, though. They're just a whole bunch of black and white images here, as you can see. And if I open one of them up real quick, you can see that scrubbing through it, we have our ocean just being painted onto that plain floor. You don't have to worry about the back here, that's just not going to be visible, but you can see here where the fluid will be painting the color of our sand. So that will be great, and will look really good, I think. So, and that's where you can see where we wanted to paint the rocks there as well. And that's working as well. So that is the dynamic paint. Everything is kind of set up now for the materials. I think we're ready to start rendering, and that's going to all be in part 2 of this tutorial series, as it does take a bit of time with all the different render layers and stuff. I don't want to skip anything, so I want to show you guys the best way to do it, but it will take a little bit of time, so we're going to have another video for that you can check out. It should be up within a few days of this video. But thank you for watching, and again, thank you to Lucas Weber. He was a big help in making this possible, and of course came up with the whole process himself. So huge shout out to him, and check him out at artleblender.com. And again, if you want, Artleblender on YouTube. And if you want this final scene, once we're done with it, it will be available on my Patreon page, where you can download it like all the other files on this channel, and support me in the process. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for part 2, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So keep blending. Bye.